Wonderful. So I guess we might as well start because we have some stuff to cover. Today we're beginning chapter 5 of Pirke Avot. There's only 6 of them, so we already want to start thinking about what we'd like to do when we're done with Pirke Avot. And we have several options. Number one, we can cool our heels for a few weeks and then get back. We can start right away with another topic if you like. Whatever that topic would be. I can write in our WhatsApp group some topics that I'm happy and prepared to teach and share. Or you can come up with your own topic that would carry on for X amount of time. But wherever you want to go with this, I'm happy to follow your lead and and happy to continue with whatever and whenever. Anybody have any questions, comments before we begin? Chapter 5 of Pirkei Avot could be about anything in the past, anything you have a question about. Ooh, this came up this week, and I was just wondering if or what, that kind of thing. Um, uh, if we have nothing like that, then we're ready to jump into chapter 5. Okay, here we go. Chapter 5, the fifth chapter of Pirkei Avot. It's a unusual chapter in that many of the opening teachings of it begin with numbers. For example, there are 10 things which, there are 5 things that, there are 3 things that, there are 7 things that. So sometimes the rabbis suggested the reason it was written that way is because when we use numbers, sometimes it's easier to memorize. And we have to imagine that maybe not everybody had a copy of their own Pirkei Avot. So you might have memorized somebody else's copy during the week, and then you studied it on Shabbat afternoon, which was the custom. It can be studied anytime, but Pirkei Avot was mainly begun as a long Shabbat afternoon pursuit, where during the after Passover and before Rosh Hashanah, there's a period of about 5 months where we have, in our lingo, a long Shabbat afternoon. Candle lighting is at like 7:30, 8 p.m., and Shabbat doesn't go out till 8 p.m. Saturday night. So there's a long afternoon, which gives us opportunities to do many things. And the rabbis were concerned that it's a long period of time and people would get off track from Shabbat, not necessarily violate it, but not do things within the spirit of Shabbat. So they said, let's study this and make it a weekly study, especially during the long Shabbat afternoon days. But again, it can be studied anytime. So we're jumping into a few Mishnayot, a few teachings that begin with numbers, as I mentioned. But before we get to that teaching, I just wanted to address something that may be confusing about the way the Jewish faith understands the age of the world. And this will be a brief moment of hopeful clarity. And here's where the debate begins. Scientists believe that the Earth is millions of years old. That's not unusual to hear that. The scientists will talk about the age of the Earth. Oh, it's a million years old, or give or take a few million. You know, what's a few million among friends? I think most people would ascribe to that notion. If I were to take a survey of all of us here today, would we say that? Would we imagine that the world is millions of years old? You know, there's all kinds of dating and all kinds of scientific notions about it. Would you may feel differently now, but did you at any point in your life, and maybe still now, feel that the Earth is millions of years old? No? Anybody ascribe to that? Yeah, Robert. Bob, you have to unmute yourself and then we'll okay.
When we were traveling back and forth from St. Louis to Texas before we moved here,
Yeah.
we're always listening to rabbi teachings. And one rabbi teachings that we were listening to, I don't remember his name, was talking about the destruction of the earth and then rebuilding it with Adam and Eve wasn't the first time
There
Uh,
is
the,
there is this teaching in the Talmud that says that
yeah,
God created and destroyed worlds, created them and destroyed
yeah,
them, and the one that we have is the one that ultimately survived.
yeah. And like this is the sixth time, and then or seventh. I can't remember which. He said it was going to happen 7 times, and I think we were in the sixth or something like
So, John, before we get to your comment, there is this teaching also that says that each day of creation was going to be paralleled by 1,000 years of history. This is the year in the Jewish calendar, 5786. So we're in that millennium. And then the the Jewish Messiah will come no later than the year 6000, and that will begin a new epoch. Now, will that involve a recreation of the world in some physical way? That I'm not sure, but perhaps that's where that notion came from, that there's 6,000 years, and then the seventh one introduces us into a whole new history, a whole new time period with all different kind of rules, laws, regulations, etc. John, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, this piggybacks off what Bob was saying. So I've always been a young Earth kind of person, thinking that it was a young Earth, that scientists were just wrong. But my wife and I like to listen to Ephraim Palvanov.
Yes,
I
my
don't
wife does
think
too.
I don't think he's a rabbi, but we do enjoy his teachings, and he has one called the Cosmic Jubilee, and talking about the seven Shemitah cycles of 7,000 years of Earth, and that we are in like the sixth cycle of 7,000 years. And so, anyway, through that, it kind of opened my eyes up to the possibility of the millions of years. And it's interesting that he made a statement that, scientists are just now catching up to what Judaism has known all along. And I found that interesting. So I've kind of changed my thought on it from being a young Earth to now more, it could be millions of years.
So before Patrick has his comment, is that a common term, young Earth?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. That's okay. That's a new one for me. Okay, young Earth. Patrick, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, maybe it's relevant. I heard a teacher of the Bible talk about Genesis chapter 1. And it says, I think it's Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. It says, the earth was without form or void.
Yes,
Don't know if anybody's heard
chaotic,
this.
a chaos.
Yes. And apparently, he said that in Hebrew, the words form, without form and void were tohu and bohu. And apparently, there's other parts in the prophet Isaiah where tohu and bohu are used, and they're meant to describe a post-judgment state.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So the idea being that between verse 1 of Genesis 1 and verse 2 of Genesis 1, there's a massive gap.
Wow. Okay. That's something new to me. That's very interesting. Tohu and Bohu were also the great comedy team in the Catskills many years ago. Yeah,
Okay.
they made the world, everybody howled with laughter and fell off their chairs. So, wow, this is very interesting. I like this kind of dialogue because we learn so much from each other, even though I'm the only correct one. Okay. Yes, Bob, you're muted again. If you
the another teaching I heard on
okay,
uh, possibly the Earth being older than 6,000 years is that the first 4 days there was not a sun or moon, and because of that there wasn't time, and because sun, moon, and stars are to set the time. A little bit later in Genesis,
oh,
the days, months, and years, and all that kind of stuff. So for 4 days, those 4 days may have been 1,000 years each, or maybe
okay,
many
that's
more.
that's possible. So, if there was no light yet, what was the first day of light? Let there be light, and there was light. What was that?
Good question.
Thank you very much. So the way Jewish tradition understands it is that it wasn't the light of a luminary light. It was a spiritual light that, according to Jewish tradition, God caused that light to appear. It's a holy spiritual light, which he then put in a treasure house that will be revealed in the end of days to the righteous. That was the idea. So it was the first day light, the or of the first day was not anything that illuminated the entire universe. It was a very specific kind of a light. And as a matter of fact, on the holiest night of the Jewish year, which is on Yom Kippur night, the holiest night of the year, at the very beginning of the services, all the Torah scrolls are taken out of the Holy Ark. They are held by people standing around the leader of the service, the cantor. And the very first words he says are, light is sown for the righteous. Light is sown for the righteous. Which light is that? Is the word primordial? Would that be a correct word? It's that primordial light that was created on the first day that was then treasured and to be revealed again to the righteous people. And that's kind of a subtle reminder to the people gathered in the synagogue that if you live a righteous and worthy life, you too can be rewarded with that very special light at the end of days. So, wow. Okay. So we've been around the earth and back with this one, and I enjoyed all the comments very, very much. I have a different take on this. A little, I think it's different. So again, many people believe that the earth is, because of scientists and the trust that a lot of people have in science and scientists, they would say that the earth is a few million years old. And yet, if you were to ask, what year is it in the Jewish calendar? I just mentioned it. I would say this is the Jewish year 5786. And then you would likely say, since most faith or national calendars begin with a supremely significant event, what happened 5,786 years ago that made it compelling to start a calendar from that point? You don't just start a calendar because Kit Kats came out and now they have a caramel coating. Let's start a calendar. Something big must have happened in the Jewish world, or in the world, according to Jewish eyes. Something big must have happened 5,786 years ago. And if it's not the creation of the earth, then what was it? Well, so we believe that yes, the earth was created 5,786 years ago. But again, you would say, well, it's a gabillion years old. So how do you make that kind of a comparison? How do you explain that it's possible that only 5,786 years have gone by since the creation of the world? It's a very big discrepancy, I think you'll admit, even if you don't have a calculator. Millions of years compared to 5,786, it's a big, big discrepancy. So here's how I and others answer it in a couple of ways. Number one, millions is what science says, and our theologians say 5,786. So the world may be millions of years old, but more significant than that is not necessarily the creation of the world, but here's what I teach all the time, taken from great rabbis who have discussed this. And that is something more as significant, if not more, happened 5,786 years ago, even if you don't believe that the earth was created only in that short amount of time ago. What happened? What happened is that God places a soul within the first human being. And that soul enables a lot of things to happen in the world. And when that soul was implanted within Adam 5,786 years ago, that was the significant thing that happened to start the Jewish calendar. Why do I teach that? Because until then, my imagination tells me that whatever God created before Adam was I like to call it gronking around, all kinds of uh, animals. Who knows what they were doing? And I'm imagining dinosaurs and all kinds of things and moving around. But there's probably not a whole lot of purpose to what's going on in the earth until a human being gets a soul. When a human being gets a neshama and is able to not only focus on himself, but is able to be in a posture where he can look up. Animals that are four-legged, their basic purview is down here. Animals that are two-legged, like the humans, we have the ability to look up, which the animals don't. They do. You can be a dog and still look up, but our natural posture enables us to have that further connection, not just with us and our own needs, but to direct them towards a God in heaven. So when that soul was implanted in the first human being, that started 5,786 years ago. Any comment on that?
One quick comment.
Yeah, sure.
I'd heard something similar to that, that it was the first elevated soul that could achieve a higher level of elevation. I'd heard that there may have been almost like Neanderthals, kind of people that animalistic souls
Yes.
before Adam, but Adam was the first with I think it's the neshama. So not sure,
So
but that's what
okay. So John, you're suggesting that before Adam, there might have been creations with a lower level of soul,
like the
and then
nephesh, just the animalistic soul, and that he
right.
was the first one that God breathed a higher level of soul into.
That's a very nice thought. Yeah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who should rest in peace if he actually died. I say that because there are many in the Chabad movement who believe that the Rebbe who died 30 some odd years ago is in suspended animation and will relive again. It's not a popular opinion amongst Jewish people. There's a feeling that once you died, you died. And that's pretty much the period at the end of that sentence. But he talks a lot about the nefesh habehamit. The word behema means an animal, the animal soul. He talks a lot about the animal soul and how we try to refine that animal soul into a purposeful spiritual soul, not just so maybe that animal soul was what people or the creations had before Adam. Comes Adam, and God gives him a more refined, finely tuned spiritual capacity and ability, where the other ones just had some. He's got it all now. So
But either
maybe,
way, it was monumental. It was huge.
yeah, but definitely was huge. And according to my opinion, which matters zero, but is based on other great opinions, that's what happened 5,786 years ago. I get this question asked more as a rabbi of a congregation when I had more people that would do the asking, asked a lot about this, the age of the world, science, millions versus 5,786. What's all that about? Anyway, I think it's a very interesting conversation. So the opening teaching, I don't know if it's an opening. No, it's a chapter 5, Mishnah or teaching number 2, begins by saying there were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. So if you're looking at that link that I provided, 10 generations from Adam to Noah. And the teaching says, and why? Why were there 10 generations between these two individuals? To make known how patient God is. Well, what does that mean? For all those generations increasingly provoked him from Adam to Noah. There are all kinds of agitations, etc., increasingly provoking God until he brought on them the waters of the flood. So as they're agitating, God could have said, okay, now is the perfect time. Let's get rid of this population that's not doing a thing I'm saying, nothing that I'm following, nothing that I taught, rebelling, etc. now is a good time to wipe them out. But yet, says this teaching, God waited extra layers of generations because he's patient, always hoping that, yeah, that's the way they are today, but who's to say that's how they're going to be the next week or the next month? So let's give them an opportunity to repent, give them a chance to repent. And says the teaching in Pirke Avot, this is what it shows you the measure of God's, as they call it in the Torah, erech apayim. God has the ability to be extremely, extremely patient. And this is a teaching that is a proof of that. He could have punished the generations way before, but he waited and waited until such time as think of yourself or relatives or whatever, and the kids are bouncing on the couch. They're bouncing and bouncing, and you're reading your whatever. Stop that, Johnny. And Johnny stops it for a half a second and then continues bouncing and bouncing. Johnny, I said, stop it. Okay, 5 seconds, and then bouncing again and again. And the parent says, okay, Johnny, I told you for the third time that you've got to stop it. And if you don't, whatever, bouncing and bouncing. And I'm giving you one more warning. If you keep bouncing, there comes a point where your patience just runs out. And it was one bounce on the sofa too many, and now you're going to let him have it. It's that kind of a thing. So why did God put up with all that bouncing? Because he is by nature a patient God who can wait a long time for people to return, people to come back, and people to do the right and the proper things. Interestingly enough, the Torah mentions the 10 generations from Adam to Noah. They're all listed in the Holy Scriptures: Adam, Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, Yered, Hanoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. Interestingly, just a couple of those names are still popular names in Hebrew or in Israel. Adam, you hear some. Seth, you hear. I don't know a soul named Mahalalel. And never did. Yered, I never heard of that. Hanoch, my barber is named Hanoch. And Noah. The other six, you don't hear of kids having that name. So what's the teaching here? That beginning with Adam, despite some virtuous lights here and there might have been some virtuous people, the world began its slow moral descent. And once God saw where things are headed, he could have brought an earth cleansing and evil punishing flood at any point. However, due to God's exceedingly great mercy and his patience, he waited for people to rethink their ways and reevaluate their lives and realize their spiritual shortcomings before taking that final step of bringing the flood and rid the world of its evil. However, even God's patience can run out. And that's what happened with Noah. Okay, that's the last bounce on the sofa. Time to bring on the shower of the water. So God's patience does have a limit, especially when he sees that evil is so pervasive, it has a point of no return. As it says in Genesis, the world was flooded, filled, saturated with evil and corruption. And God sat through the 10 generations that became a degeneration, and then he had to act, and he brings the flood. Okay. Any questions about that so far? Any thoughts, comments, observations, anecdotes? Okay.
You mentioned, Rabbi, the name Jared.
Yeah, Yared, yes.
Isn't that Donald
I guess
Trump's son-in-law?
Is that a political statement or?
No, you're saying the name wasn't very common, but
No, you're right.
Jared
Now
Kushner.
that you mention it, yeah, Yared would probably translate today into Jared.
Yeah,
That's good. Okay, it's not a connection I made because I'm reading the Hebrew. I'm reading the subtitles of the Hebrew. I said, oh, that could be Jared. Absolutely, that could be Jared. So,
Rabbi, Rabbi,
yeah,
I'd like a question about a generation.
okay.
Um, a generation um, normally, I shouldn't say normally, um, is 40 years, but we know that people live much, much longer. How would we determine a generation for people born during the time of Enoch? And
That's a very excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. I think
okay,
today we consider a generation 20 years. Am I right? Is it 20, 40?
I
I
thought
thought,
40.
okay. I thought it was 20, but yeah, I don't know how to answer that question because yeah, we get the feeling the timing was like way off.
Yeah,
Methuselah, 969 years. Wow. How did they count years then? Um, I'm sure there are scholarly books on this, but I don't know exactly how they counted uh, time periods in those days. Um, Not sure, but it's a good question. So comes the flood. God saves Noah and his family, hoping that their righteousness at least would permeate the future post-Diluvian generation. So here's a parable that highlights the importance of Noah. Let's say a person invests thousands of dollars to drill for diamonds, finds nothing. He pours more money and time into the project, and still it yields him only disappointment and despair. Then one day he digs out a valuable gem of such size and luster that it compensates him for his entire investment. All he found was one little nugget, and this is like greater than all the other stuff he could have had combined. More importantly, it points to the way to the discovery of an entire field of diamonds. Why he found this one, he says there must be some more of this nearby. And he digs again, and boom, look at all these diamonds all around. And so what does that have to do with the thing? The big gem was Noah. He was the big gem that God finally found in the middle of all this evil and corruption. He justified creation. He brought hope um, to the people, and that's the first teaching that we find in the fifth chapter. Uh, However, Pirke Avot continues with another 10, another 10. It's an anonymous teaching, as was the first one. And it says there were 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. Oh, there's another 10 generations. To make known how patient God is. And I know the question that you may be asking. For all those generations increasingly provoked him until Abraham, our forefather, came and received the reward which could have been theirs. He got all of the reward of the previous generations that could have been theirs had they acted properly and without evil intent and corruption. Comes Abraham and he collects the rewards of the previous 9 generations. And that's what the teaching is in Pirkei Avot. He collects all their reward. The 10 generations from Noah to Abraham were Shem, Arpachshad. Now, if Trump has a son-in-law by that name, I would eat my hat. Arpachshad, Shelach, Ever, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terach may be familiar. That is the father of Abraham and Abraham. So these are by and large not popular, not used names. But you would say this teaching sounds very similar to the previous one. Also speaking of 10 generations, also speaking of generations that increasingly angered God until such time as a redeeming and saving personality arrived on the scene. So what's the difference? Generally in Judaism, we have, especially as it relates to the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, that everything within the Torah is said so tersely and succinctly by God that there's no need to repeat or offer another angle on something. So to have 2 teachings that seem to teach the same moral lesson that God is patient, and then he finds a redeemer personality. It sounds repetitive. So why do we need two teachings that seem to echo the same thing? So it sounds very similar to the previous one. It also speaks, as I said, of 10 generations that provoked and angered, and then God found a redeeming quality in a redeeming personality. In this teaching, however, and this is what makes the two different. In this teaching, there is no cataclysmic event like the flood that seeks to ameliorate or curtail the sinning generation. There's only a personality in the person of Abraham that starts to change things, maybe. It's not a flood. It's not anything terrible that happened. It's a person comes along and changes things. Whereas in the first example, there is a cataclysmic event, namely the flood during the time of Noah. So after the flood, God built a new world through Noah and his family and patiently awaited another 10 generations for renewed mankind to behave properly. And instead, many incidents occurred during this waiting period. He's waiting again, but eventually he'll find an Abraham. But until then, we have a few difficulties with the people of those generations. The Tower of Babel, for example, happened during that time. That wasn't good, but it wasn't cataclysmic. Did God topple the Tower of Babel, or did he just confuse and confound the language so they couldn't continue to build it? It's a difference of opinion. So this teaching notes that Abraham's good deeds equaled what could have been expected from the previous generations, and so they were all saved in his accumulated merit. Comes the Abraham, and they are all saved by that heap of merit that he got, because he got their merits of the previous generations that they could have had, but they didn't act in the proper way. Added to that, he also received the reward earmarked for them. In contrast, Noah was deemed not sufficiently righteous to deserve the reward of his predecessors. So there's a big difference between the character of Noah and the character of Abraham. And it's worth to note that Noah and Abraham had personalities that were almost diametrically opposed. Noah, in being charged with building the ark, he was supposed to cause curiosity, informing people of their impending doom, bringing them to repent. That was the hope. Noah, do something. There's going to be a terrible flood, God says to him. Do something. Save the people. Save the people. But Noah, however, was very unsuccessful in his mission. Didn't do a good job. So who were saved ultimately? Who are supposed to be the ones primarily in the ark? There's Noah, Mrs. Noah, 3 sons, and their daughter and their wives, 8 people. And God wants Noah to spread the stuff, let them know there's something terrible coming on. You can change that edict, behave better, be nicer, don't be corrupt, etc. But he was highly unsuccessful. And the Torah commentaries have different reasons why he was highly unsuccessful. Maybe he was an introvert. Not every great person is out there. Not every great rabbi is an extrovert. As a kid, I had several rabbis in the congregations I attended in Providence, Rhode Island, that were quite introverted. They weren't comfortable in the public. So you say, well, isn't that part of the job? To give sermons, classes? They weren't comfortable. They did it, but you could see that they were not comfortable with it. They were good at other things, but not with that. They didn't have the gift. Maybe Noah didn't have the gift of speech. He was a nice man. He's a good man, but he didn't have that gift. Whatever the drawback that he had, he failed to move anyone. 8 people were supposed to be in the ark. 8 people ended up being in the ark. According to our tradition, he had 120 years to build the ark and convinced nobody for whatever reason. However, Abraham, on the other hand, was able to impact society. Together with his wife Sarah, according to the Bible in the early parts of Genesis, They each found effective ways to bring people from idolatry and polytheism to shattering idols and to bring them to monotheism. That's what the Torah says. When God says, leave your homeland, leave your place, and go to the land that I will show you, the Torah says explicitly, Abraham and Sarah are ready to go with the souls they created in Haran. They created souls. Again, there was no cataclysm. God uses the character of Abraham to create an entire new dynamic, a spiritual dynamic that was not there before. So, in effect, they represent Noah and Abraham, two divergent ways of staying warm in a cold environment. Noah put on a fur coat. Isn't that a great idea? Freezing. It's freezing in the lobby where you're waiting to see your doctor. It's freezing. People are chattering. And you also have your lovely fur coat on. And that way you're staying warm. While others proverbially froze in a spiritual sense. Everybody else is freezing in the waiting room. But what did Abraham do? He put on the thermostat so that others around him could warm up in the glow of spiritual connections, a very different approach. Either I put on my coat and I'm warm and have a nice day and I don't care about the rest of you, or I turn the thermostat on and everybody can feel that spiritual warmth and connection. So, okay, that's where we are at this point. So these are two tens, 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. What was the purpose? To show God's endless patience until the kid bounces too much on the sofa. Then he's got to come in. What's the difference between the two cases? They sound so similar. With Noah, there was a cataclysmic event that changed things. With Abraham, there was a new personality type that created a new type of generation with spiritual desires and aspirations. So before we continue to the next 10, any comments, questions, observations,
Quick
thoughts?
question.
Okay, John.
I'd also recently heard that Abraham, when the Tanakh or Torah talks about him building altars, that he didn't necessarily use those altars for offerings, but he used them to attract other people that sacrificed to pagan gods in order to share Hashem with them. That was kind of his tool to bring people into him so he could share Hashem with them. So have you heard
Wow.
something like that?
I have not. Doesn't mean it's not an accurate depiction. So how was his altars contained animals and theirs contained
Well, it
likely?
said that it never actually says he slaughtered anything on those altars. It just says he built an altar. And so the thought of the teaching was that he built them in order to entice others that were going to do sacrifices to the other gods, in order to teach them about Hashem. That Abraham necessarily wasn't slaughtering it on the altar himself. I don't know.
So what,
So
how would,
it-
no, I hear that. So my question is, how would the people looking on from the nations, let's say, how
Mhm.
would they know that his is so different than theirs because there's nothing on it and they have things on it? There is
That
a
I
no,
don't know.
there is a notion that when Abraham was told to sacrifice his son Isaac, the one that he loves, and that whole description in the beginning of one of the Torah portions, there is the notion that at that time, the nations were sacrificing their own children.
Mhm.
So when Abraham goes up to the mountain with the stuff that people use to sacrifice children, and the Torah is very explicit. He takes the wood, he takes the knife, these are all the accoutrements of child sacrifice. He takes it almost to the end, but the angel of God says, stop, stop, stop. That was his way of showing God doesn't want your type of sacrifice. He doesn't want human sacrifice on the altar. He wants whatever he's going to want, but it's certainly not kids. It's not humans. Um, So maybe that has some kind of a connection. Maybe he left his altar empty just to say, whatever's going to be on here, anything but humans, anything but your children. And maybe he was hoping that that would bring the people to a whole different vision of what a sacrifice and an altar ought to be. It ought not to contain humans. It ought to contain animals, which maybe he didn't use, but maybe that was the contrast.
Yeah, yeah. It was just an interesting thought that that was kind of a tool. Building altars was a tool that he had used to bring people in order to share with them. So I thought I had not heard that before.
Okay. No, I hear it. I'm trying to think. The word for an altar is a mizbeach, mizbeach, from the Hebrew word zevach, which I think means to offer something. In most of the biblical cases, it was the animals that were brought to be an offering. But yeah, so you see that Abraham, together with Sarah and their personality and character, had a lot of arrows in their quiver, if you will, to be able to show the nations there's a different way of living. God has different expectations than what your poly thinking might be. It's a very, very different level of obligation and expectation and responsibility. Um, so it seems like they're using their tools well because they brought about a renaissance of spirituality. So God didn't need that cataclysmic event. He brought into the world a cataclysmic personality, namely that of Abraham. Very interesting. I am so enriched when we get together. I mean, I can't speak to your being enriched. I can only speak to my being enriched by hearing the comments and the quality of the thinking that goes into what we share. To me, it's very, very precious. And I end up learning a lot more from you than you might possibly be learning from me. So we want to go to one more. Yeah, we have a few more minutes to do one more teaching. Unless there are questions, something just came into your mind, a thought. Okay. So this is now chapter 5, Pirke Avot. This is teaching number 4. This is now number 4. Here comes another 10, another 10. And so this 10 has this statement. It says, with 10 trials, our ancestor tried the patience of the Holy One in the wilderness with 10 different trials, meaning they agitated God in 10 different ways. They tried him to kind of get his goat, if you will, by doing these 10 things. In the book of Numbers, the biblical book of Numbers, called in Hebrew Bamidbar, in chapter 14, it says that God says, they have tested me there 10 times and did not listen to my voice. So within the teaching itself, it seems to not mention what are these 10 times that God felt tested by the people. It just stops by saying he was tested, but it doesn't enumerate anything about what those tests were. And we have some of our commentators who fill that in. So here's how they describe the tests. Number 1 was when the Israelites were pursued by the Egyptians to the sea, and the Israelites told Moses they would have preferred to remain slaves than to die in the desert. Now, you may remember this from that great movie, The Ten Commandments by C.B. DeMille. A lot of these agitations, by the way, came from what is called in Hebrew the Erev Rav, which means the mixed multitudes. So there is this notion that when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, there were a lot of stragglers, not an inconsequential amount of stragglers. There were a lot of stragglers who came with the Jewish nation, and they were the agitators. They were the What was his name in the movie? Um, the guy that used to do the Maxwell House coffee commercials that none of you will remember. Edward or Edgar G. Robinson. Do you remember him? Ah, where's your Lord now, Moses? Where's your God now, Moses? It was his people that were the major agitators. All the other ones were trying to be pure souls, but they were attention got diverted by these agitated Erev Rav, mixed multitude. So they are likely the ones that said, "Oh, we have so many things wrong in the desert. It would have been better to die as slaves than to be here in the desert and put up with all these inconveniences." Um, Not very different from individuals who make aliyah and come to Israel expecting the Disneyland of Jewish experience. And they find out that there's also real life going on here besides, war, contention, uh, debate, arguments, and things of that nature. There are 4 HMOs in Israel, only 4. And if you want to get an appointment, and you pay very little for that, socialized medicine is very cheap. Uh, I think I told you already, my wife had a knee replacement, cost her 1,100 shekels, which is about $400, $300. Go do that in America. Pay $300 for a knee replacement. It's socialized medicine. But with that you need an MRI. I know people who, because of a shortage of MRIs here in Israel, they'll get a call at 12 midnight. We have an MRI available in Haifa at 3. This is the time to come, 3 a.m. So I mention that because, the Disneyland version of making Aliyah doesn't always pan out, and a lot of people complain, why you have to, every time I have to renew this, I have to get another piece of paper, another piece of paper. I've got reams of paper that, yeah, so they were the complainers, this Erev Rav, the Edgar G. Robinson, or whatever his name was. They were the ones that did a lot of the complaining. They also complained at the bitter waters of Marah when they were in a place called Marah, called that because of the bitter waters. They couldn't drink it. They complained. They complained again when they ran out of food. They left the manna overnight. They were told not to keep it overnight. Every morning, God said, trust me, you will get a new supply of the manna bread every morning. And if you collect it at night, it shows that you're not believing. So, and there won't be anything left at the end of the day. It'll be a new supply every morning. They complained about that. They gathered the manna on the Sabbath, even though they were told not to, and none would be found on the Sabbath. When they ran out of water, they complained. They worshiped the golden calf. That was a biggie. They rebelled against God's commandments. Chapter 11 of Numbers. They complained that they were sick and tired of the manna. They couldn't eat it anymore. They got sick of it. It was the only thing keeping them alive. And they got sick of it and they got tired of it. And the last of the 10 that's listed by some of our commentaries, they believed the evil report of the 10 spies when they scouted out the Holy Land. So these are, according to some of the commentaries, the 10 ways that the people tested God's patience. And we have a lengthy list of agitations, as we just heard. And they cast a negative light on the nations. So you would say, well, what's the message of this teaching? And there is no stated message. Some of the other teachings had a stated message. What was it? In order to show you that X. This list, we have the last 2 teachings that can shed some light, in that here we continue to see the extent of God's patience with us. Well, you would say that sounds familiar. What's new about that? He always wants our repentance despite our disloyalty. And even though this generation of Israelites had seen the miracles of the 10 plagues, you could say you saw with your own eyes. With your own eyes, you saw things split, and the lice and the vermin and the frog. You saw it. And despite that, they still were disloyal. And even though this generation of Israelites had seen the miracles and the plagues, which should have cemented their faith and that faith of their children, it should have. God is patient with them, these very obstinate people who experienced 10 serious crises in their faith, but who ultimately accepted the word of God and became his chosen nation with a mission to bring the world to recognize the one holy and involved loving God. So maybe that's the extra lesson. It sounds like the old lesson, shows you God's patience. But maybe the extra piece of this lesson is not only it shows God's patience, that he's willing to wait and wait and wait, but that because of his waiting, that nation turned itself around eventually to be worthy of being redeemed. So if I was God and somebody showed me that list of 10 ways that I was tested and I wasn't patient or whatever, I would say, I'm not redeeming these people. Look at them. Ungrateful. I'm not doing anything. Let them rot. If I was to be crass, but let them rot. Who cares? No, somehow they turned themselves around through Moses, etc., the other leadership, Aaron, Miriam, some of the others. They turned themselves around to such a degree that they became worthy of the revelation at Mount Sinai. That's a big turnaround. So maybe that's the added message, that God can be very, very patient, knowing that this kind of turnaround is possible. And he's okay to wait for that turnaround. So first he had a flood. Then he had the character and personality of an Abraham. And now he has a 40-year excursion through the desert and exodus from Egypt, which is going to make them worthy of receiving the entire Torah at Mount Sinai 3,337 years ago. That's a big turnaround. Okay, so that's the first few teachings of chapter 5. I think that's where I stopped there with my preparation. Any questions, any thoughts, comments, parting shots, observations, what you may have gotten out of today, what you may have wanted to get more out of today? Happy to hear it before we wish each other a good day and a good week.
Rabbi, what do you think of the character of Abraham? I mean, he's a really big character in the Bible.
Major.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've not got, we could spend hours, but what's your key impressions of Abraham that caused him to please God?
Abraham is often called the man of chesed. Chesed is the Hebrew word for kindness. Some would say it even connotes kindness over and above, somebody who has an over and above kindness. And that's borne out in several different places in the text of the Torah. It's borne out in many of the midrashic commentaries about how kind he was, how he looked out for the others. He was not the type of person that would put on a coat and get warm, but he was the thermostat kind of a person. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a good example of a chesed, which is so trivial. So yesterday, I'm walking around the neighborhood in Jerusalem, and I'm kind of hungry. I hadn't eaten for a while. And I passed by a small makolet. A makolet is like a small grocery store. I go in, I see on the outside of the grocery store, there are these popsicles that have low calorie, which is great, 56 calories, very low sodium. Each one has 7 whatevers of sodium, which is very low. And I said, oh, these are perfect. I took 2 of them. I'm going to have these on the way home. There was some kind of a traffic jam in Jerusalem. There was protests about the fact that the The ultra-Orthodox don't want to join the army. It was traffic, so I figured, let me buy two of these because it's going to be a while to get home. I go into this very small makolet, like a bodega, very tiny, and there are two major steps you have to go down to get to the level of where most of the food is and where the cashier guy is. And I'm hesitating because they're very steep and there's no railing. So the guy looks at me and he says, Abale. It comes from the word Abba, which is father. Abale has become a popular term in Israel for somebody who is older, like Gramps would be like Gramps, comma, Abale. Um, so he says, Abale, he says in Hebrew, you don't have to come down. I'll come up to you. He comes up. I said, Kamazeh, how much do I owe you? He tells me 14 shekels. Okay. I give him the money and I'm ready to go down to get the change. He says, no, 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 in Hebrew, stay here. I'll go down and bring the change back to you. He brings the change back, and I said in Hebrew, wow, wow, you are a person of chesed. You are a person of immense kindness. What's the kindness? He noticed that I'm hesitating to come down the steps. He noticed that I'm hesitating to come down and get the change. He perceives by the way I'm walking or looking or hesitating that this guy he could use a little help. How much help? Let me help this guy. He was 18, 17, 18. Is not somebody who's seasoned with all kind of great characteristics, if you know what I mean. A young guy. And I said, you are a real ish chesed. You are a person of great kindness and great consideration. And he says in Hebrew, Todah, Todah Rabbah, like he touches his heart, Todah Rabbah, thank you, as if that compliment meant a lot to him. But that's just like a little crumb of what chesed is. It's to notice, it's to consider, it's to put yourself in the other person's shoes. It's to be cognizant of what's going on around you. Who needs help? What kind of help do they need? Who needs this? Who needs that? So Abraham or Abraham is known in the books as the paradigm of chesed. And each of our forefathers, Isaac and Jacob, they each have also their own paradigm. Isaac is known as the man of gevurah, which means strength, but it's not the weightlifting strength, but he had the strength of resolve. He had other kinds of strength, but none of them related to barbells. And Jacob is the most enigmatic paradigm of truth, emet, truth, emet, which I frankly never understood that well because a lot of Jacob's life is punctuated by things that we would look at and interpret as, was that honest? I don't know how. Was that honest? And he got the title of being the man of emet, man of honesty. All right, there are ways to explain it, but yeah. So Patrick, when you say, what do I think of when I think of Abraham? Last thing I'll mention, you go to a Jewish wedding, there's a chuppah. There's a chuppah, there's the canopy, it's covered, it's open generally on all four sides. Doesn't have to be on all four sides. Sometimes the two are closed and the front and back are open. That structure called the chuppah is taken after the tent of Abraham that was known to be open on all four sides. He set himself up at a crossroads of wayfarers and wagons and business people and whatever. And he had it open on all four sides. So no matter what direction you were coming from, you would end up in his tent because it was all open. He would sit you down, have some food, have some drink, etc. They would say thank you to him. And he would say, it was my pleasure. Don't thank me. Thank. It all comes from him. And that was his way of bringing people closer and having them rise spiritually, if you will. So that's another example of how his chesed, how his kindness, his consideration, and the way he looked out for other people presents itself in the very structure under which we get married.
Mm.
There's the tent of Abraham.
Mm.
So that's what I think of when I think. That's a lovely question. That's what I think of when I think of Jacob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. My pleasure. Yep. Okay. Any other comments, questions, observations? Okay. So, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It's always good and fun and educational and inspirational to be together with y'all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and a good week, and Shabbat Shalom if you do that. And God willing, we'll get together next Wednesday and start thinking about what, if anything, you would like to do when we're done with Pirke Avot. Again, I had options at the very beginning. Pause a few weeks, pause a few years, whatever, or continue with this. Oh, I'd like to know more about that or whatever. So give that some thought. And until then, we'll wish each other a very good, a good day, and just be well to you and your families. Take care. Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom, everybody.
Bye-bye.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.
Shalom.
Alrighty.
Shabbat shalom.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.